Did you know that New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the entire world? Of course you did, because everybody knows that, and you don't need a video to tell you that. I think at this point, it's common sense that New York City is literally one of the most expensive places in the world. And because of that, people get so scared of moving to New York City because they think that they just can't afford it. And it's definitely not an easy place to survive because the prices of everything have just gotten so ridiculous. So when it comes to renting, buying a home, going out dining, drinking, and even just groceries and your day-to-day living expenses, it's just out of control here. So what can you do about it? There's so many people that know New York City is so expensive, but they still think that it's worth living in New York City. I'm one of those people. I have to say, when I came to New York City, I had absolutely no money, and I had to do everything it took to really survive and afford living here while trying to build up my career. I have to say, I'm definitely a better place now financially, but I do still think that sometimes it's just the prices here are out of control. In this video, I'm going to help you figure out how to start budgeting in New York City. The first thing I want you to get under control is your bills. Now, I know that's a very cliche answer, but it's definitely the foundation of what you should start with. What is going to be your most expensive bills? Car payment is easy because depending on where you're living in New York City, if you're living in Manhattan and even some areas of the surrounding boroughs, you can definitely get away without having a car. And I recommend it because when I first started living in Manhattan, I didn't have a car. I do have a car now, but life was so much easier when I didn't have a car. Having a car in New York City is extremely expensive because you're either going to have to pay for parking or you might have to pay for the parking tickets that you accumulate from street parking or just parking around in different areas of New York City because everybody gets tickets here. I always advise people not to move to New York City with a car and just rely on transportation here. That instantly cuts your bill. If you have a car that you own outright and you can sell it and make money off of it, you can get some extra money from that. You will cut costs just by eliminating the car here. Now, what's another very common bill that people have to deal with? Student loans. Now, it's a tricky situation. Some people wait a little bit longer to move to New York City so that they can pay down or pay off their student loans. For some people, depending on your student loan, it might not be possible for you. And most people do move to New York City with some type of student loan. If you are drowning in student loan debt, I want you to look into loan forgiveness programs, and I want you to look into potentially loan refinancing if it makes sense for you given your current student loan rate and what you have left on the loan right now. Those are going to be two options for you that might help you and might make living in New York City a little bit more affordable for you in the meantime while you're still trying to deal with that student loan situation. Student loans is one of the most common issues that as a real estate agent I deal with my clients, is that so many of them just have student loans and it makes it very hard to live in New York City, at least in a neighborhood or area that they want to live in. Now, I'm going to highly advise that you do not move to New York City without any kind of savings. I see too many people make this mistake over and over and over again. There are so many people that move to New York City with no savings, hardly anything to their name. They're always trying to catch up and basically find jobs, find gigs, side hustles, something to try to make up that money. There are people who move to New York City and they do make it long term here in the city by doing that. It's going to basically taint the city for you when you come here with literally no money. Now, speaking from experience, I kind of came to New York City with not really any money. Now, I was working a job right before I came here. I did also have a new business that I was starting, and I did have income coming in. I had a savings account, but not a very big one, and it didn't last very long in New York City. But if I came here with absolutely nothing, like absolutely nothing, it would have been very hard for me to make it those first 2 years, and I might have left. I advise trying to save up as much as you can before getting here. Now, I don't want this to be an excuse of like you're never able to move to New York City because you never have enough savings, because some people do fall into that trap as well, where they're just constantly making an excuse for why they can't move here because they never have enough money. I don't want that, but at the same time, I do think that your first year in New York City is going to be so much better if you're not constantly trying to fight to pay your rent every step of the way. You're going to have a better experience here. There's kind of a common saying here to save up 4 months of expenses before moving here. And I think I would like to see at least 6 months of savings before moving here. But I think that that's a decent amount, is to at least have 4 months. It gives you enough time to be able to really like get used to New York City and be able to actually make more money when you're here, because there is so much opportunity to make money when you're here. But 4 months at least, I would say. That's kind of like the common rule. Now, that's considering all your expenses, not just rent. So keep that in mind as well. I always recommend for people to have a job lined up if they can before moving to New York City. This is so crucial. Some people move to New York City with hardly any money, then they don't have a job lined up, and then they're really scrambling or fighting to be able to pay their rent every month, and they just don't enjoy New York City at all, and they have a miserable experience. Try to have a job lined up before you get here. That might require you, depending on where you're moving from, to spend some time visiting New York City, coming in to interview or meet with people and network to find that job. But I recommend that you do that over moving here and then trying to scramble around and doing all that networking and interviewing and things like that. Come out here a few times, visit for short amounts of times, and try to get as much done as you can in that time period to set yourself up for success when you move here. It's a very bad feeling to feel under pressure, like you can't afford living where you're living. And there's so many people who I see every day that struggle with this here because the cost of living is so high. Now, it doesn't have to be your dream job that you have here at first. Most people do not have their dream job when they first move to New York City, or they think they have their dream job until they start working in that career path. Then they discover that it's no longer their dream job. Happens all the time here. The good thing about New York City is there are career opportunities for pretty much every career in the world, I would say, in New York City. So you have so much opportunities here, and there's always going to be someone that works in your field or can help you get further along in your field if you provide them with some type of value as well. There's going to be so many different opportunities for you here. The first job that you have doesn't have to be your end game job. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can just be a means to an end in the beginning, and that's completely okay. There are also a ton of side hustle opportunities here. Most common is, of course, going to be like Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats, things like that. Those delivery apps like Grubhub and DoorDash and things like that. But there's also other side hustles. You could be a cat sitter is a huge one. A dog walker is a very, very popular one as well. There's just really things like that, like this gig type of work where you can make a serious living through gig type of work in New York City. There's just so much demand for it. TaskRabbit is another big one. If you are handy or you have a certain skill set that you can put to use, TaskRabbit is in such demand here. So you can also consider that. These are all ways that you can put your time and skills to use and start making money right away. I always tell my clients, don't overspend on an apartment in New York City that you're probably not going to spend a lot of time in. People move to New York City for the opportunity and the environment here and the culture of New York City. They don't move to New York City just to have a really nice apartment and spend all your time in your nice apartment. If people wanted that, they would probably move to a suburban area or somewhere else where it's a lot cheaper to have a home there. I always say that your neighborhood is actually more important than the actual apartment, like home that you live in, because you're going to spend probably more time in and around the neighborhood than you're going to spend in your apartment. Most people don't spend a lot of time in their apartment in New York City. And if they do, they're probably not having the best experience in New York City because that's not why people move here. I always say don't overspend on an apartment. Some people come to New York City and they kind of picture this dream life in New York City and they feel like they have to have amazing, beautiful apartment that they can brag to people back home about. And I pretty much always advise people not to do that. Go a little bit on the cheaper side in the beginning. So that way you can have a better life in New York City. You can actually go out and try different foods. You can go out and drink with friends. You can go try different activities in the city. And if you're just spending all of your money on rent and you're really overextending yourself there, you're going to feel like you can't do the other things that New York City has to offer. And then you're going to resent New York City. Take advantage of public transportation and city bikes in New York City. I think that is very, very underrated. So many people rely on Uber and Lyft and they're so used to just booking a car at all times and just not caring about the cost because it's easy and it's convenient. I get it. And sometimes, trust me, I'm the first one to do that as well. But when I was first coming to New York City, I never took cars services like ever because I was trying to save so much money. So unless I really, really had to, I was always relying on the subways. The buses are also underrated. You can get pretty much anywhere you need to go in New York City on the buses. Sometimes it's even more convenient than the subways. And city bikes. I didn't use city bikes for my first few years in New York City. And then I started using them within the past 2 years, which is funny because now I can afford to take an Uber and Lyft whenever I want, but I still rely on city bikes all the time. I think it's convenient and it's a great way to get around the city. And it's kind of enjoyable. Like it's kind of fun to be able to ride around the city bike. Now, be careful because there are some neighborhoods that do not have good bike lanes and you have to be very, very careful riding a city bike. If you are on the west side and certain areas of the east side, there's kind of like literally dedicated like lanes. West side kind of has an actual like city bike highway that you can ride on. And it's very, very convenient. You can basically get uptown, downtown very easily by just riding all the way on the west side. For city bike, you can pay for a membership and that way you can just be able to unlock any regular bike anytime you want. You have to pay a little bit of an upcharge for an e-bike, which is an electric bike, but you also get a discount if you have the membership. I definitely think it's very, very worth it if you think you can get your use out of the city bike. I don't want you to forget about the cost of utilities when moving to New York City. So many people look at the rent price and they're like, okay, great. I can just afford that actual rent price. Not so fast. Utilities are pretty expensive in New York City. And it's going to vary depending on your unit and your building, but utilities can be a couple $100s a month. I want you to keep that in mind because if you're cutting it really, really close with your actual rent number and you feel like you almost can't even afford that, remember that there could be a couple more $100s just on utilities alone that is not included in the rent. Please keep that in mind because I see a lot of people getting themselves into serious trouble because they're cutting it too close with what they can actually afford. New York City has a lot of expensive dining, but there's also a ton of cheap eats here. You can easily find a meal for around $10 $7 in New York City, or even cheaper if you're willing to go like the pizza route and get like, they don't really have dollar slices anymore, but they do have like $1.25, $1.50 slices. So you can find cheap food here. Now, I know that might not be the most health conscious food, but when I first came to New York City, I was the queen at finding every $5 meal in New York City. $5 meals don't really exist that much anymore in New York City, but you can still find inexpensive food. You just have to look for it and prepare yourself in advance. And also, if you want to go to a restaurant, sometimes they offer really, really good deals for happy hour for food sometimes too. Or a certain night of the week, they might offer like prefix or a certain deal on some type of like entree or meal that they have. There are ways to find inexpensive food in New York City or deals. But the problem is that a lot of people just don't go out of their way to find that, and they just walk into a place blindly and then they're shocked by how much they spend at the end of the day. When moving to New York City, don't be afraid of roommates. So many people move to New York City and live with roommates in the beginning because it's so expensive. And it's very common here. Honestly, it also makes living in New York City probably a little bit less lonely sometimes, because even though there's so many people in the city, literally more than 8 million people, sometimes it can feel very, very lonely if you don't really like find your group or find people to hang out with or meet up with. So moving in with roommates sometimes helps that situation. And it's very common for people to live with roommates here that they don't even know that they meet here. So I don't want you to be afraid of that. And also, people live with roommates at all different ages in New York City. It's literally not even weird for somebody in their 30s, 40s, or later to live with a roommate, because it really just depends on their life situation. If they're only going to be in New York City for a temporary amount of time, sometimes people don't feel the need or want to get their own place. So it's not strange at all. It's all about preference. It's all about what you can afford. So I don't want you to feel weird about that, because I know in other areas around the world, sometimes you feel weird living with a roommate, but it is not weird here at all. And probably more people do that than the people that don't have a roommate. So I hope this video helped you figure out some ways on how to budget for New York City. It's not easy, but it can be done, and you can live in New York City in a more affordable way. The hardest thing to get around in New York City is the housing cost, because it really is hard to get affordable housing. And another thing actually that I do want to mention is, depending on how much you make, there is also a affordable housing lottery, meaning that you can basically put your name in to be considered for a cheaper, more affordable rent for certain buildings in New York City, all over New York City. Look up affordable housing lottery in New York City. That's something I forgot to mention in this video, something that you could take advantage of depending on what your income is, because it is all income based. So keep that in mind. That could be a good way that you can get into an area or a neighborhood or a building that you want to get into. There are ways. You just have to look for them. I would love to know, do you guys have any budget tips or advice that I missed in this video about New York City? As always, I just love hearing from you guys.